All right, let's talk about a real-life monster. We're going to dive deep into the fossil record to meet the largest snake that ever lived. And I mean, this thing was so massive it completely changed what we thought was possible for life on Earth. Yeah, we're talking about the one, the only, Titanoboa.
Okay, so let's start with a big question. Think about it. 66 million years ago, bam, the dinosaurs are gone, just wiped out. That leaves this huge opening, right? A power vacuum at the very top of the food chain. So, who stepped up? Who became the new biggest, baddest predator on the entire planet? You might think you know, but the answer? Well, it's probably not what you're expecting.
This is what took over, the Titanoboa. And just look at the scale here. Seriously, the anacondas you see in nature shows, they're nothing. This thing was longer than a school bus. It weighed over a ton. We're not just talking about a big snake here. This was a true leviathan.
All right, so let's get properly introduced to this prehistoric beast. Time to get into the really mind-blowing stuff that scientists have dug up. Okay, its full name is Titanoboa cerrejonensis. And that name is perfect, right? It literally means Titanic boa from Cerrejón, which is the place they found it. This monster lived about 60 to 58 million years ago. That's a period called the Paleocene. So basically, right after the dinosaurs bowed out, this guy stepped onto the stage. And if you still need some perspective on its size, just check this out. We're talking up to 14.3 meters. That's 47 feet. And it weighed over 1,100 kilograms or 2,500 pounds. It makes even other prehistoric giant snakes look small. And today's green anaconda? Piff, a garden snake in comparison. So that leads to the really big question. What kind of world could even create a monster like this? Yeah, how does something like this even happen? Well, the secret, it's all in the environment. Titanoboa wasn't just living in a land of giants. The world itself made it a giant. You see, being a cold-blooded reptile, its incredible size was only possible because it was hot. And I mean really, really hot. Scientists figure the average temperature where it lived was a scorching 32 to 33 degrees Celsius. That superheated world was basically the engine that let its metabolism run wild and get that big. And get a load of its neighbors. Everything back then was supersized. Titanoboa was slithering around in a swampy world with turtles as big as your kitchen table, and crocodiles, some of the biggest ones we've ever found. So yeah, it was a giant, for sure, but it was the king in a land full of giants.
And this quote from Dr. Jonathan Block, he's one of the paleontologists who figured this all out, it just says it all, doesn't it? For a solid 10 million years, it didn't matter if you were on land or in the water, Titanoboa was the apex predator, period. Nothing else even came close.
So you might be wondering, how do we know all this stuff? Well, the story of how it was discovered is pretty much a fantastic piece of scientific detective work.
So it all kicked off back in 2002 in this huge coal mine in Colombia called Cerrejón. At first, researchers were finding these massive vertebrae, so big they just assumed they had to be from some ancient crocodiles. But then it wasn't until 2009 that a team took another look and had that aha moment. They realized what they actually had were the bones of the biggest snake the world has ever known.
Now, the science gets even cooler because it tells us this thing was a specialized hunter. You might picture it crushing dinosaurs or something, but its skull tells a different story. It was probably piscivorous. That's a fancy word for fish eater. It had a ton of teeth, but they weren't very strong. Perfect, though, for grabbing slippery prey like giant lungfish out of those massive rivers it lived in. But here's the twist. That incredible size, the very thing that made it the king, it was also its greatest weakness. Let's get into what actually brought this titan to its knees. So the reign of the Titanoboa came to an end simply because its world changed. The planet started to cool down, and for a giant reptile that absolutely depended on that extreme heat to survive, well, that was a death sentence. It couldn't get warm enough to have the energy to hunt or even digest its food. Its giant parade disappeared, and just like that, the monster snake faded away. So that's the story, right? Locked away safely in the fossil record. But now we're going to have a little fun with this. Let's pivot from what actually was to what could have been. Just imagine for a second, deep in some forgotten corner of the world, maybe an isolated river valley that somehow stayed as hot as the ancient past. What if a few of them survived? What if they managed to cheat extinction? Now, for this to even be possible, our snake would have to pull off a straight-up evolutionary miracle, a biological leap that no snake has ever made.
It would need to completely cut itself off from needing the sun or the hot swamp water. It would need to develop the one thing that could let it survive the cold, the ability to make its own body heat. It would have to become warm-blooded.
And just look at the difference here. This hypothetical survivor would be a totally different animal. It's not that slow, patient swamp dweller anymore, waiting for the sun to get going. No. This would be a relentlessly active predator, powered by its own internal furnace, which means it would need to hunt all the time. And its menu? It would have to change. Forget ancient fish. We're talking about the top predators of the modern Amazon. Caiman, jaguars, even the biggest anacondas would now be prey.
The impact? Oh, it would be absolutely terrifying. The very existence of this thing would throw the entire Amazon ecosystem, this delicate web of life that took millions of years to build, into complete and utter chaos. You'd have a new, undisputed king. Forget worrying about piranhas or crocodiles. Just traveling down a river would be a life-or-death gamble with a snake the size of a bus. Whole parts of the rainforest would become no-go zones, basically handed back to the prehistoric world, ruled by a living monster.
And all of this brings us to one last, kind of chilling thought. We just talked all about how a superheated world is what created this titan in the first place. Its very existence was a direct result of a certain kind of climate. So, as our own planet's temperatures start climbing, you have to wonder, right? What biological rules are we rewriting? Titanoboa is gone, yeah, but the conditions that made it are huge reminders of how life can adapt to extreme heat. And sometimes it adapts in some truly giant, monstrous ways.